Well, good morning, good afternoon, or whatever time of day it is where you are. You are very welcome to our webinar this morning on diversity and inclusion in the world of work, focusing on the socioeconomic participation of women with disabilities and how to achieve an equal future. My name is Maureen Piggott. I'm the treasurer of EDF. EDF is the European Disability Forum, which represents 100 million disabled persons in Europe and is organized through a membership network of disabled persons organizations and totally governed and run by persons with disabilities and their families. I'd like to start with a few housekeeping comments. First of all, to let you know that there is sign language interpretation and captioning available. You will find the link in chat box. Also on your screen, you will see the presentation slides and sign language interpreter. All attendees are muted, but you can still ask questions and we very much encourage you to do so. Just to keep us right, if you would keep questions about technical issues in the chat box, and for content questions, use the question box, the Q&A box. And you can start sending your questions whenever you're ready, and we will aim to answer all your questions before the end of the webinar. We'd also be very happy to see who you are and which organizations you are joining from. So if you would put that information in the chat box, that would be great. There will also be an accessible recording of the webinar and a transcript on the EDF website at the end of the webinar. So, to give you some information about the program that we're talking about, you'll be hearing today from Ariana Almeida, who's from the Women's Economic Empowerment, who is a Women's Economic Empowerment Specialist for Plan International. And Ariana will be speaking to us from her wealth of experience as a social entrepreneur with a multi-sector background and many years' experience working to fight inequality in Europe, USA, Central and Southeast Asia, and Africa, with a focus on gender equality. So Ariana will be our first speaker, bringing, as I said, a unique combination of practical and oriental perspectives to the discussion. And she will be sharing the findings of the gender analysis of the I2I program. And if I can tell you a little about the I2I program. I2I is a 3-year project funded by the UK Department of Foreign, Commonwealth and Development. It aims to deliver direct and sustainable change for women and men with disabilities in 2 countries, Kenya and Bangladesh. The approach is to promote access to waged employment in the private sector. So that is the focus of the project, and demonstrating the potential for change with successful interventions that strengthen disability inclusion in a lasting and permanent way. The program is led by Leonard Cheshire International, and together with a diverse and complementary team of international and local organizations. Plan International is leading the work on gender equality, diversity and inclusion, working with the consortium members to ensure that the whole program and its interventions address the specific vulnerabilities, risks and barriers that face women with disabilities when accessing the world of work. I2I is committed to ensuring that interventions take a gender-sensitive approach, addressing the practical needs of the women participating in the program to improve their daily lives, and where impossible, a gender-transformative approach that is challenging the gender norms and prevailing attitudes and power relations. To understand the gender dynamics, power relations, and disability-specific barriers by faced by women and men with disabilities in their economic participation. Plan International conducted a gender analysis for the program in Bangladesh and Kenya. Earlier this month, on the 8th of March, as we all know, we celebrated International Women's Day. This year's theme was Women in Leadership, achieving an equal future in a COVID-19 world. And it highlighted how the global pandemic has exacerbated the specific and ongoing challenges facing women in relation to their full and meaningful participation in political, social, economic, and cultural life. These challenges are being experienced disproportionately by already marginalised groups, including women with disabilities. Today, as I've already said, Ariana Almeida, the Women's Economic Empowerment Specialist at Plan International, will be presenting the key findings from the gender analysis. We will also bring to the table the voices of women with disabilities from the program. And this will be represented by Nasreen Jahan, the founder and executive director at Disabled Child Foundation in Bangladesh. And we will be hearing the business perspective from the private sector representative, Margaret Ndei, a talent specialist at Coca-Cola Beverages Africa in Kenya. We would also like to promote discussion on recommendations that support the participation of women with disabilities in the world of work. So there will be an interactive discussion after the presentations, and we very much invite you to take part in that discussion and contribute to the conclusions. In the meantime, please remember to post any questions in the question box, and we will also select some of those key questions to address in the end if there's time. And I'll remind you again, if there are any technical issues, please use the chat box and our colleagues will help you out. So it's now my great pleasure to introduce Ariana Almeida. And as I have already given you a little of Ariana's background, I will just invite her to share with us the findings of the gender analysis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maureen. Thank you to the other speakers here today and to everyone that is joining us in this event. I'm really excited on behalf of Plan International and the Innovation to Inclusion Consortium to be here today to present to you the findings, the key findings and recommendations of the gender analysis that was conducted under I2I. And I wanted to start exactly by the point that Maureen highlighted in the introduction. I2I is committed to taking a gender-sensitive approach. And this means that in its various interventions, from the moment it enrolls participants to the trainings to persons with disability, to the sensitization of private sector companies and training institutions, and also to the support it gives to these stakeholders in order to increase recruitment and engagement of women and men with disabilities, I2I needs to recognize and address the specific barriers and needs of women and men with disabilities that participate in the program. And we know that persons with disability face intersecting forms of discrimination, but we know, and the gender analysis will show in more detail, how women and girls with disabilities are more likely to face discrimination and exclusion when compared to men and boys with disabilities. So if you go to the next slide, the objective of the gender analysis was therefore to go deeper into the understanding of the gender dynamics, the power relations, and the gender and disability specific barriers that are faced by women and men with disabilities in their economic participation, both in Bangladesh and in Kenya, the target countries of this program. And so we looked at gendered roles and responsibilities. We've also looked at gendered patterns of access and control over assets and services. We explored and tried to understand the social capital and access to networks by women and men with disabilities, their participation in decision-making and leadership, and also issues on safety and risk. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that this gender analysis was based on, first and foremost, extensive literature review and secondary data analysis, but then also completed with data collection with stakeholders both in Kenya and in Bangladesh. We interviewed a total of 113 stakeholders, including women and men with disabilities, both employed and unemployed, caregivers, and also other stakeholders such as representatives from organizations of persons with disabilities, community champions, private sector representatives, representatives from vocational training institutions and government. It's important to highlight that this data collection was significantly impacted by the COVID pandemic, which was in full force when this exercise was being conducted. And this affected not only the number of stakeholders we were able to engage, but also the methodology. And so, for example, we were faced with limiting the scope of questions asked, for example, to ensure the safety of participants since the interactions were being done remotely. If we go to the next slide, the gender analysis findings were then grouped in these 8 areas of looking at the gender roles and responsibilities, the economic participation and access to work in private sector, issues of mobility, gender patterns in the access to information, education and training, social capital and access to networks, decision-making patterns, and also gender-based violence against women with disabilities. And the idea of having these areas of analysis was to make sure that we were also providing very direct and actionable recommendations, not only to the program, the I2I program, to continuously improve the meaningful and safe participation of women with disabilities in the interventions, but also to have a good framework that could inform future programs and future interventions on women economic empowerment of women with disabilities. I wanted to also clarify that it's important to note that in this particular session, we'll be specifically talking about the barriers faced by women with disabilities and the recommendations for their increased participation in the private sector. And also highlight that the full report with this gender analysis in all its detail will be available very soon. So we will be able to share that with you all as well. We can go to the first area of analysis, looking at the gender roles and responsibilities. And here I'd like to start by saying that the gender analysis confirmed that patriarchal attitudes and discriminatory stereotypes about the roles and responsibilities of women with disabilities are a critical barrier to their socioeconomic participation. We've selected one of many quotes. This one is from a woman employed, a woman with disability employed in Bangladesh. And she said that due to our family role, considering all the cooking, care work, reproductive role, we are not encouraged to take more responsibilities because we are overwhelmed to balance this role and expectations from family and society. And this really highlights the issue of time poverty that undermines women's empowerment and the challenging balance that is required of women with disabilities when they want to engage in training and in the workforce. And so I would highlight some of the recommendations that were provided based on these findings. And I would select 2 critical ones. So one is to really engage husbands and families to support the enrollment and participation of women with disabilities in this program in particular, but in the workforce in general. And also that there's a wider reach to families and communities through awareness raising on the value of women with disabilities in the workforce, the recognition of women's workload, and the promotion of more equitable power dynamics and the distribution of labor within the home. The next area of analysis focuses on mobility. And we found that in addition to poor road and transport infrastructures that affect both men and women with disabilities, there is an increased barrier to women due to the unsafe access, especially in public transports. And this is even further challenging because women also face discriminatory gender norms that restrict their mobility and their freedom to safely access public spaces. And therefore, it is really critical that programs such as I2I provide or support safe transport options for participants in their activities. But at the same time, and as we are working closely with the private sector, also raise this awareness and encourage private sector companies to provide safe transport options for staff with disabilities, especially considering that mobility to and from work was really identified as a critical challenge, and especially for women with disabilities. The next area of analysis is focusing on access to information. And here in both countries, we found that there are gender inequalities in the access and control over assets and information, and that in particular, women with disabilities access and use less technology than men with disabilities. And this was important because as we look at the program and its dissemination and the engagement of women and men with disabilities, we wanted to understand what was their interaction with digital platforms and their access to technology. And so it was interesting to see that, for example, while many respondents, both male and female, mentioned that they accessed information on job vacancies online, most employed respondents that were interviewed said that they got their information about their current assignment either from newspapers or from friends or family members, but also, and very importantly, from the organizations of persons with disabilities that they are members of. And so it was really important for us to understand how this impacts the way that we look at communication with program participants. And our recommendation was to have a really clear mobilization strategy with very clear guidance on how to reach women with disabilities in particular and how to engage them safely in the program. It was also important to note that this also includes investing in a variety of channels to reach participants. And so, as I said, not only using online platforms, but also a variety of channels, including community-based structures. And finally, it's important to highlight that it's critical to have a strategy to bridge the gender digital divide. And so as part of the programs that the interventions that we are doing, it's important to consider having digital literacy training opportunities, particularly for women with disabilities, and also supports for access to computers and internet in safe spaces, since this was really considered a critical barrier to the engagement of women with disabilities. The next area of analysis is education and training. And here I wanted to highlight that although Kenya and Bangladesh have fairly different policies with regards to education, we noticed the low levels of education and the lack of relevant technical skills as a key challenge, particularly for women with disabilities in both countries. And so our recommendation was to ensure that the program interventions not only target participants with secondary education, which was the original target, but also that they keep a flexible approach to engaging women with disabilities with primary education to bridge this divide. In addition, we've recommended that the training design and the supports from the program ensure that women with lower levels of education can meaningfully engage. And linking with the issue that was raised on the gender digital divide, also ensuring that remote interventions, which became so common, notably training, for example, so common over the last year, that they are truly adapted to promote effective interactions and engagement, especially acknowledging that women with disabilities showed more difficulties and challenges in expressing their questions or participating actively in these forums. The next area that we focused on was social capital and access to networks. And we noticed that in both countries, women with disabilities were not often engaging in activism for the rights of persons with disabilities, more so than men with disabilities. And we've found that this was mainly due to existing social norms, as we've mentioned before, limited mobility, and also worries with safety in public places. And so it was one of our recommendations is to really invest in engaging women rights organizations and networks that focus on the rights of women with disabilities, and bringing these voices to trainings, to community awareness activities, to the wider community, to show the importance of promoting activism and to participate in movements that support the rights of women and men with disabilities. The next area of analysis is decision-making. And we noticed also that women with disabilities have lower decision-making power in both countries. In Bangladesh, the gender analysis interviews indicated that men with disabilities have more control over decisions than women with disabilities. And also that in both countries at community level, women with disabilities are underrepresented in decision-making and very, very much excluded from critical discussions at that level. And so our recommendation here, or one of our highlighted recommendations, is to really invest in identifying and showcasing couples and families who share power and decision-making, and use them also as role models and champions of more equitable relationships. And in addition, we've recommended that trainings under I2I, under this program, but this would extend to other programs focusing on the empowerment of women with disabilities, that they include components of gender, power, and rights of women with disabilities. And in particular, I'd like to mention that in Kenya, PLAN will be testing a gender transformative approach in a pilot project with 100 women with disabilities and their caregivers. And the idea will be to go deeper into understanding what works to increase the socioeconomic participation of women with disabilities. We're almost at the end before we go into the economic participation topic that we'll be further discussing today. But I wanted to touch on the findings on gender-based violence to highlight that gender-based violence is pervasive in both countries. And we found that it's prevalent among women with disabilities. And it's important to note that there's potential backlash for women who participate in the workforce and in activities that promote their economic empowerment. And therefore, training to members of this particular consortium, I2I consortium, but of partners implementing programs similar to this. It's really critical that they have very high awareness of this risk, and that they are able to not only identify situations that may arise, but also and monitor it, but also have a clear understanding of how to disclose this information and how to report it. On the other hand, it's important to see that in both countries, women with and without disabilities often face discrimination, harassment in the workplace, and that this is seen by many men as normal and natural behavior. And so it's important to make sure that these programs are in very close connection with private sector to sensitize them for this situation, to look at policies and practices on discrimination, harassment, and violence in the workplace, and to really work with private sector companies and training institutions to make meaningful changes and support the safe participation of women with disabilities. The final point that I wanted to highlight is the findings on economic participation of women and men with disabilities. And I will not highlight any recommendations here because we will talk about them further in our discussions. But I wanted to highlight that our findings show that overall employment of persons with disability is low in both countries, and this was not something that was surprising. But it was important to understand how to go deeper into the understanding of why this is happening. And so in Bangladesh, for example, we saw that women with disabilities are disproportionately employed in lower wage jobs and primarily in the garment sector. There were reports of people with disabilities being paid less than persons without a disability in the same position. We've also looked at the self-perception of women and men with disabilities, seeing the low levels of self-confidence and self-esteem as barriers to socioeconomic participation, something that we saw affecting women with disabilities more than men with disabilities. And interestingly, we saw younger and educated respondents showing higher confidence in their rights. However, in both countries, women with disabilities showed less knowledge about the job markets and career opportunities. And this is really critical to understand because we know that stigma and discrimination prevail, both at the level of recruiters, but also within families and communities, with families often being unsupportive of the engagement of persons with disability in waged labor. And these circumstances really contribute to negative experiences from women and men with disability in the workplace. And this affects mainly women due to the burden, double burden of the gender and disability and all the social norms that pressure them to manage so many different roles. And so the perception of recruiters, for example, is that recruiting a woman with disability will be an additional challenge. And it's interesting to see that even private sector companies that we engaged, even those that were trying very hard to build more diverse workforces, shared that they found it difficult to reach suitable candidates and to really design and advertise positions that are inclusive and that bring more women and men with disabilities to their workforce. And so these are points that I will leave at the end of my presentation and that we will pick up again once we are discussing what works to increase the participation of women with disabilities in the world of work and what would be recommendations that we could give to change this status quo. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ariana, and thank you also for keeping to time with a very complex presentation. So our next presenter is Nasreen Jahan, who's the founder and executive director of Disabled Child Foundation in Bangladesh. Nasreen is speaking to us from her own personal experience and foundation, which is a non-government, non-profitable and non-political organization established in 2000, working to achieve equal rights and opportunities with disabilities. Nasreen will also be bringing to us the voices of women in the program in both Kenya and Bangladesh. So thank you, Nasreen. Over to you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I like to express my heartfelt thanks to the organizer to select me as a presenter from Bangladesh, and I feel very honored. Actually, the issue is very required issue and demandable issue actually and I would like to express the situation of women with disabilities in Bangladesh. Actually, they are facing very difficulties and it is a very negligible group actually, and they are a very vulnerable situation they are passing, actually, women with disabilities in Bangladesh. Now, actually, I like to speak in Bangla, and my Tasneem Appa, please translate it English for all of you. Thank you, Tasneem Appa. Okay. অ্যাকচুয়ালি বাংলাদেশে প্রতিবন্ধী নারীরা কিন্তু খুবই ভালনারেবিলিটির মধ্য দিয়ে যাচ্ছে, কারণ বিভিন্ন কারণ রয়েছে তাদের। তাদের হয়েছে এডুকেশনে তাদের অ্যাক্সেসটা সম্পূর্ণভাবে এখনো নেই, এবং তাদের রয়েছে অনেক ইনঅ্যাক্সেসিবল এনভায়রনমেন্ট বিরাজ করছে আমাদের দেশে, কারণ আমাদের উইমেনরা এখনো ঠিক মানে চলাফেরা করতে পারছে না, মুভ মানে খুব ইজিলি তারা মুভ করতে পারছে না, কারণ আমাদের
okay, so Ms. Nasreen is trying to explain that the women in Bangladesh are actually going through kind of a very hardship life, especially women with disabilities, based on the main reasons being the access to education or qualifications, if you put it that way, the inaccessible environment for various purpose, for example, in terms of transportation.
ইনফরমেশন তারা আসলে ঠিক মতো পায় না, যারা গ্রাসরুটে আছে তাদের পক্ষে অনেক ইনফরমেশন তারা আসলে অ্যাক্সেস করতে পারে না। আর তাছাড়াও যে আমাদের যে ওয়েবসাইট গুলো বা আমাদের যে এগুলো আসলে অ্যাক্সেসিবল না, আমরা যে ভিজুয়াল ইম্পেয়ার্ডরা আমরা তথ্যগুলো নিব সেগুলোও ঠিক কমিউনিকেশনের জন্য সেগুলো অ্যাক্সেসিবল না, ওয়েব অ্যাক্সেসিবিলিটি নাই আর কি।
Okay. She says that access to information is also quite challenging as well, especially for those living in the grassroots level or those in the remote areas. If you say access to information on the websites, especially for visually impaired people, they can't access to informations on websites because these are not designed especially for them.
হ্যাঁ, তারা আসলে ভিজুয়াল প্রতিবন্ধী নারীদের জন্য তেমন যুগোপযোগী কোনো ট্রেনিং ফ্যাসিলিটিস এর সুযোগ নাই, যেগুলো দিয়ে আসলে তারা কর্মসংস্থানে জয়েন করতে পারবে, এরকম কোনো নিড বেসড ট্রেনিং, প্রপার ট্রেনিং এর ফ্যাসিলিটি তাদের জন্য এখনো তৈরি হয়নি।
Okay. And also especially the disabled women, there are not trainings that are particularly catered for them, so they have less access to trainings and workshops. Well,
হচ্ছে এমপ্লয়মেন্ট, তার যে সুযোগ এমপ্লয়মেন্টের হচ্ছে অনেকের যোগ্যতা থাকা সত্ত্বেও কিন্তু তারা এমপ্লয়মেন্টের যেতে পারছে না, কারণ হচ্ছে সরকারি পর্যায়ে আমাদের কোটা নেই, কোটা সিস্টেমটা বাতিল হয়ে গেছে, এবং বেসরকারি পর্যায়ে আসলে প্রতিবন্ধী নারীদেরকে বিশেষ করে সিভিয়ার যারা ডিসেবল আছে তাদের জন্য আসলে বেসরকারি চাকরিতেও কর্মসংস্থানের সুযোগ খুবই লিমিটেড।
Okay. So because of lack of trainings and workshops or the proper qualifications that are needed, these women they cannot actually compete in the job market. And as a result, there aren't many jobs that they can actually apply for. Especially there used to be a quota system for disabled women in the government sector, which has been waived off. So as a result, now they have to compete with others, and also in the which is quite difficult for them. And also in the private sector, jobs are very rare. Women with severe physical disabilities also have less options of competing or applying for a job in these areas.
এই কারণেই আসলে প্রতিবন্ধী নারীরা তারা যা অর্থনৈতিকভাবে তারা আসলে যেহেতু এখনো অর্থনৈতিক মানে তাদের অর্থনৈতিকভাবে তারা হচ্ছে যেহেতু স্বাবলম্বী হতে পারছে না, সেই কারণে তারা ফ্যামিলিতে বলেন, সোসাইটিতে ফ্যামিলিতে তাদের আসলে ডিসিশন মেকিং এর কোনো সুযোগ নাই, তাদের কথা কেউ শুনতে চায় না বা তাদেরকে কেউ আসলে মূল্যায়নই করে না। জি।
So because they are not economically solvent, since they do not have the right qualifications or the jobs, they cannot be independent as well. As a result, what's happening is that they cannot take any lead roles or any sort of roles in the decision making, whether it's within the family or even in the society. Also, they're not valued as well because of lack of all these inaccessible, informations or trainings or jobs. জি বলেন।
জি, বাংলাদেশ ইভেন্ট সিআরপিডি স্বাক্ষর এবং অনুস্বাক্ষর করেছে 2008 সালে, এবং তার বেসিসে আসলে দুটি আইনও আমাদের বাংলাদেশ সরকার প্রণয়ন করেছে। একটি হচ্ছে রাইটস এন্ড প্রোটেকশন অ্যাক্ট 2013 আর আরেকটি হচ্ছে নিউরো ডেভেলপমেন্টাল অ্যাক্ট 2013 প্রতিবন্ধী মানুষের জন্য। জি।
So Bangladesh and CRPD, they have both signed and also two laws have been passed as well. One is on the disability law, which was Act 2013, and also in the neuro disability development law as well, again in the year 2013.
এছাড়াও বাংলাদেশ মানে কনস্টিটিউশনে কিন্তু নারী পুরুষের সম অধিকারের কথা বলা হয়েছে, কিন্তু প্র্যাকটিক্যালি আসলে প্রতিবন্ধী নারীরা কিন্তু একেবারেই তারা ইকুয়াল অপরচুনিটি পাচ্ছেই না, অনেক বৈষম্য এখানে পরিলক্ষিত হচ্ছে। জি।
In the Bangladesh Constitution, there's well written about the equal opportunity and gender balance between male and female, or man and women. However, practically this is not practiced. They're totally, women are very much discriminated.
অ্যাকচুয়ালি আমাদের আইনে যে ধারাগুলো রয়েছে, যে প্রতিবন্ধিতার ধরন রয়েছে, মানে আমাদের আইনটি সম্পর্কে আসলে আমাদের যারা অ্যাক্টিভিস্ট, যারা আইনটা প্রণয়ন করবে, তারা আসলে এখনো অ্যাওয়ার না।
Also, the acts that are actually written in the law and in the articles, many of them are either not aware, and also those who are going to be implementing these legal rights or the laws, those who will work on establishing these are also not very much aware of these.
যে কারণে আসলে এই বিশাল মানে একটা জনগোষ্ঠীকে ওই পিছিয়ে রেখে আসলে গোটা ডেভেলপমেন্ট, ন্যাশনাল ডেভেলপমেন্ট আসলে কখনোই সম্ভব নয়, এবং আমরা আমাদের যে এসডিজি গোল এটাকেও কিন্তু আমরা বাস্তবায়ন করতে পারবো না যদি আমরা এই প্রতিবন্ধী নারীদেরকে আমাদের মেইনস্ট্রিমিং না করতে পারি, সম সুযোগ সম অধিকার দিয়ে তাদেরকে এগিয়ে নিয়ে আসতে পারি। জি।
এসডিজিটা কি বলেছেন?
এসডিজি সাস্টেনেবল ডেভেলপমেন্ট গোল, এসডিজি গোল, এসডিজি টার্গেট অ্যাচিভ করতে পারবো না আপা।
And these are the reasons that a huge community actually, or a huge group has been left behind or neglected. And as a result, the sustainable development goals that are outlined cannot be achieved, by leaving out this huge community.
So আমরা সেই জন্য আমাদের সমাধানের ক্ষেত্রে বলতে পারি যে যে প্রবলেমগুলো রয়েছে সেগুলো যদি সরকার এবং বেসরকারি পর্যায়ে যৌথভাবে আসলে খুবই কম্প্রিহেন্সিভ ওয়েতে যদি সেটাকে দেখা হয় এবং সমাধানের লক্ষ্যে এগিয়ে নিয়ে যাওয়া হয় এবং আমাদের আইনটাকে যাতে বাস্তবায়ন করা হয় সেদিকে যদি সরকার অনেক বেশি আমি বলবো যে যদি আগ্রহী থাকে তাহলে আসলে এই যে প্রবলেম গুলো রয়েছে এগুলি ওভারকাম করা খুবই সম্ভব। জি
so saying that Susan, as a recommendation, the government and the private sectors can work combinedly or jointly in a comprehensive way in terms of implementing these laws that are already there. And also, if the government is keen, then they can actually implement these laws, and we can actually see some results and overcome these problems that we are seeing and the discrimination that we observe.
Yeah. অ্যাকচুয়ালি আমরা এখন যারা ডিপিওরা রয়েছি এবং আমরা যারা প্রতিবন্ধী নারীরা আছি আমরা আসলে এখন ভয়েস রেজ করছি যে আমাদের প্রতিবন্ধী নারীদের জন্য আসলে বিশেষ ব্যবস্থার প্রয়োজন রয়েছে, কারণ একটা পিছিয়ে পড়া জনগোষ্ঠীকে এগিয়ে নিয়ে যেতে হলে আসলে একটা বিশেষ ফ্যাসিলিটির মধ্য দিয়ে তাদেরকে নিয়ে যেতে হয়। তো এই ভয়েস আমরা এখন রেজ করছি, তবে তারপরেও আমরা এখানে সরকারের সহযোগিতা এবং বেসরকারি পর্যায়ে সকলের সহযোগিতা আমরা কামনা করছি। ধন্যবাদ।
So the DPOs and the disabled women community, actually, they are raising their voice nowadays for allowing them special or for arranging special facilities for them. However, we think that if the government or the private sectors are not looking into it or are not working towards the same line, then this will not be possible. But if, on the other hand, if they do, then there's also positivity in it, and these can be overcome.
সবশেষে আমি বলতে চাচ্ছি, যদি সম সুযোগ এবং সম অধিকার পায় তাহলে প্রতিবন্ধী নারীরাও নিজেরা স্বাবলম্বী হতে পারবে এবং তারাও দেশের জন্য অবদান রাখতে পারবে এবং তারা একটি ডিসেন্ট লাইফ লিড করতে পারবে। থ্যাংক ইউ।
So in my conclusion, I would like to say that if these disabled women would be given the equal rights and the equal opportunity, then they can actually play a role in the community, and they can also actually contribute to the socioeconomic part as well, and as well lead a good life independently. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nasreen. Sorry to have to rush you. We heard from Nasreen about the day-to-day realities of lives for women in Bangladesh, the barriers they face, but also some concrete recommendations on collaboration and implementing the laws that are already in place that would make a huge difference. So now we will move on and hear a perspective from the business community. Our next speaker is Margaret Ndei, who's the talent specialist from Coca-Cola Beverages Africa, based in Kenya. Margaret is, as I've said, talent specialist. She's passionate about diversity and inclusion and believes that the journey to diversity and inclusion requires a collaborative effort. And for that reason, she's been pleased to see Coca-Cola Beverages become a member of the Kenya Business and Disability Network, and also the United Nations Women's Empowerment Principles, that's UNWEP. She's also ensured that the company partners with other institutions such as Sightsavers, who have facilitated unconscious bias training and disability inclusion training for all employees. Under her leadership, Coca-Cola Beverages was able to win the award of the most inclusive global brand in Kenya in recent National Diversity and Inclusion Awards. She is a first-class honours degree from the Catholic University of Eastern Africa and is a certified human resource professional in Kenya. Margaret brings a wealth of experience in how to promote the inclusion of women with disabilities in the workplace. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you so much. Next slide, please. So I'll be taking you through barriers faced by women with disabilities. One of them is discrimination, and women face discrimination in two forms. One, because of their gender, and secondly, because of their disability. At Coca-Cola Beverages, Africa, Kenya, we have been able to employ persons with disabilities, and we have seen with the right support and working culture, they can be able to thrive when it comes to their performance. Lack of relevant assistive technology. For example, if someone has hearing impairment, they will require hearing aid. And if someone has visual impairment, they require Braille to be able to perform. Therefore, organizations need to ensure they provide relevant assistive technology to ensure women with disabilities are able to perform. Lack of mentors is another barrier. I always say that a person who is excellent in terms of their performance have always had a great mentor. And therefore, there's an opportunity for corporate sector to be able to provide mentorship sessions to persons with disabilities so that they're able to be guided on the career to pursue and the skills that they need to acquire. Lack of education and vocational skills has resulted to skills gap. So at times in the corporate sector, you find this skills gap because what is required at the job market and what the individual has does not match. Therefore, it's an opportunity for corporate sector to partner with learning institutions to ensure that students and even employees are equipped with the relevant skills required in the job market. Inaccessible workplaces is because at times in the corporate sector, we do not have inclusive sanitation facilities. We do not have ramps to accommodate people maybe who have physical impairment, and therefore there is an opportunity to improve and ensure that we have accessible workplaces. Next slide, please. I believe diversity and inclusion is not a one-man show, but requires collaborative approach. And therefore, as Coca-Cola Beverages Africa Kenya, we have been able to partner with various institutions. For example, we partnered with Deaf Empowerment Kenya, and we were able to onboard employees who have hearing impairment. Upon onboarding, we ensured that we also facilitated sign language training to all our employees, and we even issued sign language books to the line managers to guide them on how to interact with employees who have hearing impairment. We did partner also with Sight Savers International, and they were able to facilitate for us unconscious bias training and also disability inclusion training. This training has seen employees accept persons with disabilities at the workplace, and the employees feel welcomed. We also partnered with Kenya Business Disability Network, and the reason why we ventured into that network is to ensure we learn best practices from other companies. We are able to access a wider talent pool of employees who have various types of disabilities, and we're able to champion the rights of persons with disabilities. So I would encourage other corporate companies seek partnership so that you can be able to learn from other companies what they are doing. We have also created employment opportunities from these partnerships. So we have onboarded various types of employees who have different types of disabilities. Next slide, please. We have also facilitated sensitization training for our employees. So some of the trainings that we have done, I mentioned sign language training for our employees. We also facilitated unconscious bias training for our employees, and also disability inclusion training. Previous slide, kindly. Previous slide. Accessibility assessment is also quite key. I would encourage organizations. What we did as a company last year, we wanted to onboard more employees who have different types of disabilities. And we needed to ask ourselves, is our work environment accessible to everyone? So we did partner and we were able to do accessibility assessment. And of course, this is something and an area that corporates can take advantage of. If you want to have diverse workforce, you also need to ask yourself, is the working environment able to accommodate the different types of disabilities that we have? And also policy is also critical to ensure that you attract, develop, and retain diverse workforce, and also to ensure you have an inclusive culture to accommodate employees who will be having different types of disabilities. The next slide shows some of the women that we have within the organization. We have Rosemary Wairimo in the manufacturing department as a quality controller. We have the next lady who's at Crown Beverages Limited, again in the manufacturing department. And we also have Fina Awino in logistics department as a sorter. So these are just a sample of employees within the supply chain. And as you can see, it is possible to accommodate everyone at the workplace. So what we have done as an organization to accommodate more women with disabilities, we have been able to partner with various learning institutions, and we have been able to supply them with learning materials such as projector, whiteboards, graph charts. Not only have we partnered with learning institutions, but what we have done is also partner with women leaders at the county level, and we're able to provide the girls with sanitary towels. This will ensure that there is low dropout rates by the girls and even reduction when it comes to early marriages. Next slide, please. This is an image showing Coca-Cola Beverages Africa Kenya donating learning materials to 2 learning institutions. As you can see, there is whiteboard, there's the graph charts, and the projector. In conclusion, next slide, please. In conclusion, what I would say and encourage is that we need to partner with other organizations to champion the rights of persons with disabilities. We need to facilitate trainings to our employees. For example, unconscious bias training, disability inclusion training, so that when the employees come on board, they feel welcomed within the organization. There is also need to ensure we conduct accessibility assessment so that as we onboard diverse workforce, they feel accommodated. And last but not least, is to ensure that we offer assistive technology devices to employees. For example, if someone has hearing impairment, they will require hearing aid. If somebody has visual impairment, they will require Braille. So let's also ensure as we onboard the employees, we also provide them with the necessary assistive technology that is required. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Margaret. It is so encouraging to hear such a good example of the successful inclusion of women with disabilities in the workplace. And I think you made it very clear the steps that were necessary and the importance of partnerships with disabled people's organizations and also in the business community sharing expertise and with the educational institutions too, going back upstream to help people access education and qualifications. So thank you very much. And with that, we will move on to the discussion part of our event and encourage everybody, please, to join in. We have 20 minutes and will be facilitated by Ariana in a discussion of all that we've heard and of your experience as participants. Thank you. You need to unmute, Ariana.
I should know this by now, right? Sorry, I'm just checking if everyone can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, great. So what we wanted to do was to now take some time to really hear your thoughts and your experience as well regarding what works to support women with disabilities to access private sector employment. And we've heard various voices in terms of what the biggest challenges. We've seen that we in fact have low levels of employment in private sector, and we've looked at barriers at the individual level, so low self-confidence, low self-esteem, issues of technical skills and capacity, sorry. We've also looked at issues at family and community levels with unsupportive members. We've looked at limited knowledge of the job market by women with disabilities, limited access to leadership. We've looked at the issues of double burden of discrimination due to the gender and disability. And we've looked at how this impacts stigma and bias by recruiters. We've also looked at issues of transport, the need to be clearer in the commitment to inclusion, both at a policy level, but also in the actual infrastructure. And so we've looked at these various areas, and now we wanted to open the discussion so that you can contribute and say, what do you think can engage more women and increase their confidence and their agency when working with the private sector and engaging with the private sector? How can we support and strengthen the family and community support? And how can we engage private sector better, but also support best practices, and as Margaret was saying, interventions that really support women's engagement, the engagement of women with disabilities. And so what I'm going to suggest is that you can use the chat box, and we'll do this area by area to make it a little easier. So we'll first look at what works in your view to engage and increase confidence, engage women with disabilities and increase their confidence and their skills. And we will ask you to either use the chat box if you want, but you can also raise your hand and we'll call you to share your view. In the meantime, myself and the team will be adding your recommendations here to these little post-its so that we can then in the end have a wider view of what everyone contributed to the discussion. So I'm opening the floor to anyone who wants to share their experience and their recommendation on how to better engage women with disabilities in the private sector and how to increase their confidence, skills, and agency. And let me just access the chat box. Maureen, just to confirm, you'll be able to see who's raising their hands, right? I'm sharing my screen.
I can look.
Okay, because I'm sharing my screen, so I'm worried that I might
miss. I see you have already 2 questions, huh?
So the questions I think we'll address at the end, but we can look at them. Now the idea was to see in the chat if people are contributing to what did they feel works to engage women with disabilities in the world of work, and how we can have really practical, and I think it really adds to what one of the questions is, how you can have really practical recommendations on how to engage women, especially women with low education levels. And so it would be great. We have various participants in this call, and we would like to, we've talked quite a bit. And so we really would like to hear from you now, and then we'll wrap up, obviously. But please, if you want to contribute, raise your hand and unmute yourself. If you prefer to use the chat box, please do that.
Hi, Ariana, this is Diana speaking here. I just would like to tell that attendees cannot mute and unmute themselves. Anybody who would like to contribute, please raise your hands or write in the chat box, and I can allow you to talk or to write or contribute to the conversation.
Thank you for the clarification, Diana. That's helpful to know.
Yes, yes, I'm Nasreen. I'd like to say something.
We can hear you, Nasreen. Go on.
Yes. Is actually private sector মানে যারা employers আছে তারা আসলে তাদের খুবই মানে নেগেটিভ একটা অ্যাটিটিউড আছে যে তারা প্রতিবন্ধী মানুষদেরকে আসলে কর্ম নিতে চায় না, এই কারণে যে তারা মনে করে তাদের প্রোডাকশন আসলে ব্যাহত হবে। প্রথমে তাদের এই ধরনের একটি ধারণা থাকে, এবং এমনও হয় যে হয়তো অ্যাক্সেসিবিলিটিটা আছে, লিফট আছে, বা কিন্তু ভিতরে যে তাদের রিজনেবল অ্যাকোমোডেশন তৈরি করতে হবে ওই ওই ইয়েটা থাকে না অনেক সময়, যার কারণে তারা প্রতিবন্ধী মানুষরা যদি ওখানে এমপ্লয়েড হয় সে তখনও তারা ড্রপ আউট হয়ে যায় আর কি। এই বিষয়গুলো তাদেরকে অনেক ভালোভাবে জানা দরকার, বোঝানো দরকার। জি, তাসনিম আপা প্লিজ। Hello, Tasneem Appa.
Yes. I was just struggling to unmute, but however, what Nasreen is saying, that at the private sector, there's a prevailing negativity, especially in hiring disabled people, not only women, but anyone with some sort of disability. And because they kind of feel that this is going to hamper their production, or their performance will not be up to that level, which will actually increase their performance or the company's face value. As a result, even some of the offices or the organizations may have lifts or other facilities for people with disability. However, they do not have reasonable accommodation inside or within the workplace. As a result, these people with some sort of disabilities or with disabilities, severe disabilities, they kind of drop out. So things that these need to be actually identified, these need to be told to these organizations, so they know exactly what sort of accommodations they need or what sort of adjustments they need to make in order to accommodate or hire more women with disabilities and make it accessible for them.
Thank you, Nasreen. Yes, that's a good point, and it's one that we're adding. So if you can see the screen, we're adding that to the point on engaging private sector. We have a comment on the chat box from Jenny, and we've started, if you can look at the post-its, we've started adding some of the recommendations here, which was increasing decision-making, like supporting decision-making, make sure that we use young women with disabilities as role models to share their experience and how this can influence and support the engagement of other women with disabilities, and sharing their experience with the community, which is great. We've also added here the issue that Nasreen was discussing in terms of reasonable accommodation, and how important this is to make sure that women are actually able to fully participate in the world of work. I think, Margaret, you were about to say something?
Yes, I'd like to contribute also. I think there's an opportunity for the corporate sector to partner with learning institutions, so that to ensure we do not have a skills gap, because at times you're looking for a wider talent pool, but you find there's that skills gap. So if the corporate sector can partner with learning institutions, looking even with persons who have disabilities, that would really help. Another area where the corporate sector can assist is mentorship. There is an opportunity to offer mentorship sessions to institutions that have persons with disabilities, so that we're able to guide them in terms of their career, in terms of the skills that is required in the job market. Another area I would also request is training on entrepreneurial skills to persons with disabilities, and offering financial support. So as corporate sector, we need to ask ourselves, for example, with suppliers, the suppliers that we have, how many persons with disabilities owned businesses do we have? If we do not have any, it's an opportunity to ensure some of the suppliers we have in the corporate sector, we give an opportunity and outsource to businesses that are owned by persons with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you, and that's really critical and all great. all great points. And it's interesting to hear you talking about mentorship. That's actually one of the things that we noticed as a critical point is, and a recommendation and an advice is that we really, both for women and also for companies actually, that we look at this idea of role models, but also of mentors. So if, for example, again, if there's women starting their path into the world of work, how can we, encourage these connections with mentors, but also with companies. As I was mentioning before, often we have companies that want to have a more diverse workforce, but they then struggle on how to do it. And so really also having this connection with other companies that are being able to overcome those barriers is really critical. Thank you, Margaret. I was seeing here, Maureen, do you want to share your point? Do you want me to write it down regarding schools and vocational guidance?
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to the subject, because I think the earlier we start, the better. And I know certainly in the UK, our experience has shown us that one of the main barriers to young people with disabilities getting into employment is that they haven't had the same experience as others of the workplace and of actually holding down a part-time job through school or having those work experience connections.
That's really critical. And one of the things we also found in the gender analysis was that most respondents that had previously had opportunities to work as an intern, so most respondents with disabilities that had an opportunity to be engaged in an internship or an apprenticeship, then they were more likely to be recruited. The actual companies that offered those internships would often then recruit them later on. And so that is really a critical point in terms of that experience and exposure from the individual, but then also from the recruiters. I don't know if anyone has any other points on this.
There is a comment from Kate in the chat box.
So international development and humanitarian sector. Oh, sorry, I just lost Kate's comment.
I can read it out.
Yes, can you do that, please?
Yes, international development, humanitarian sector to learn from private sector to diversify staff, ESP, especially women with disabilities, and have found the cost involved.
Yes, it's interesting. I think, so the point, Katie, you're making is that programs such as I2I should also learn from the private sector on how they are doing this and not just the other way around. So not just programs supporting private sector, but also bringing private sector experience and best practices to the forum. That is really, really critical. It's really interesting. I see Jenny's writing a long message. Jenny, do you want to raise your hand and share with us?
I can give you the floor, Jenny, if you want to share.
Okay.
Hello, maybe I can just make a comment if you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I think the discussion has been for quite some time about how the private sector seems to be a lot more ahead on with regards to equality and diversity, especially with regards to people with disabilities, but also with regards to sexual orientation and gender identities and so on. Mm-hmm. And it feels there's still a gap in the development humanitarian sector in this area. And a lot of the conversations I've had come down to attitudes, yes, but also funding. And as we're at a point where we're seeing so much funding being cut, is this actually going to impact more gravely on these areas where people feel, well, it's not the focus of our work because we're saving lives or we're doing X, Y, Z. But in fact, if we exclude people within our staff, we're not going to be inclusive in our programs. We won't be able to be. So I don't know, I think there's a real need for more learning, but also, yes, it does cost, you know, some of these trainings, some of these devices to supply the staff with what they need, and to maybe adapt some of the buildings or some of the, you know, equipment. It's not all costly, but some of it is costly. So how do we go about making sure that as the donors are cutting funds, it doesn't impact on these areas?
Really, really interesting. Thank you, Kate. Yeah, and that's a really good point. I see that Maureen has raised her hand, but I'm just gonna, I think Diana unmuted Jenny's mic.
Yes, I unmuted Jenny as well. So if you want to tell Jenny now, you can do it now. And I can also see Maureen raised her hands.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jenny Peter Lopez. I'm working at Light for the World, and I mean, some of my comments have been already taken up. I think I just wanted to add another idea on, because we have one leadership program for women with disabilities in Cambodia, which has really showed that like giving this opportunity to women to really network, to get to know each other, to strengthen the knowledge on the rights. I think this is also something that has been mentioned before by knowing about your rights, the international rights, but national rights is really important. And like putting all this together, it really empowers the women and then showcasing them again. So it's really about showcasing, and then this really increases also your access to livelihoods and to socioeconomic empowerment. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jenny, for adding that. Maureen, do you want to take the word? Yeah.
Thank you. Briefly, just I felt we hadn't said much about family and community, and it is such an important area. I think the first thing is to ensure that welfare systems recognize the cost of disability to the family and to the individual, and that is separate from whether or not the person is in work. That would go a long way, I think, to overcoming some of the barriers. And I think the second one is that, like in the other areas, hearing the success stories from your peers. So parents hearing from other parents, families hearing from other families about the successes of girls and women accessing work and being successful in it. And a final point on the business sector, and that is, we've talked about the costs. We should also talk about the benefits. There is a strong business case for employing people with disabilities. There's a lot of information that shows when people with disabilities get jobs, they stay in them. They are reliable and good employees, and that offsets the costs of assistive technology or other adaptations, because you're reducing recruitment and reducing other management costs and managing potentially employees with higher turnover. So back to you.
Thank you. That's great. And thank you for starting the points on strength and family and community support. We were originally going to go step by step, but then it's great that the discussion evolved and it was more organic. So we kind of went to the different areas. Anyone else wants to add to the particular?
Ariana, we have one more comment from Dorothy, and I think we should conclude because there are a lot of questions in the question and answer box.
So I think, so Dorothy was saying, strongly believe having a deliberate criteria to ensure participation on the onset of all activities. And this is something that is key, and it's actually something that was really a focus of our recommendations in terms of having a clear mobilization strategy, acknowledging that women are less likely to enroll in these programs and to feel confident to participate in these interventions, and to have less opportunity also in terms of, as we discussed before, their mobility and access to information. And so, yes, I think it's really important. Dorothy also says going the extra mile to reach the targeted groups is part of the solution. And then in terms of companies, there should be a way of ensuring information on employment opportunities reach the grassroots. organizations should ensure they have policies that have zero tolerance to violence, harassment at the workplace. Absolutely. And this is critical. I mean, both ensuring that there's various channels to reach women and men with disabilities. And as Margaret was mentioning, it's true that, linking with training institutions is a critical step, but also thinking about linking with networks and organizations that work with persons with disabilities to ensure that that communication is being done at that level as well. That can go a long way. Before I've heard you, Diana, and your comment in terms of wrapping this up, I just wanted to ask, give it another minute just to see if there's other last comments on strengthening family and community support, because it's one in which haven't had a lot of discussion yet. So just if there's any other final comments here before we wrap up. So either on the chat or raising your hands.
Ariana,
yeah.
I just have a point, and my point will be on setting a target. It's important to ensure representation of persons with disabilities, not only in entry-level positions, but making sure they have a seat at the table, even in middle-level management and even at the board level. What gets measured gets done. So here in Kenya, we have Persons with Disabilities Act that requires 5% of the total workforce to be persons with disabilities. So I would encourage the corporate sector, let's put a target. If it's internship, apprenticeship programs, just ensure that you put a target so that we ensure they have a seat at the table at the end of the day. Thank you.
Absolutely, that's a really good point. And it's a good quote, what gets measured gets done. Yeah, and I think just so wrapping up this discussion, and again, if you want to add anything else to the chat, you can keep doing that, and we'll continue to add to the mural, and then we can share this all in the end. But I would just highlight a couple of last points. So one, in terms of the engagement in strengthening family and community support, I mean, just to strengthen what Maureen was saying, the importance of really showcasing success stories is critical, but also thinking how we can do this, not only engaging and showcasing the stories of women with disabilities that were successful, but also of supporting husbands, of supporting families, and how they were able to overcome their challenges in the way that they were perceiving women's participation in the world of work. That's really critical. And also really the importance of engaging community leaders in this process. A lot of what can be achieved can really start at the home and at the community. And so really important to think about how to engage traditional structures and community leaders to support this movement and to give voice to this support of women's participation in the workplace. I will wrap up for now, and I will give back the word to Maureen for the questions and answers. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have 4 questions in the Q&A box, and I will ask for help from the I2I team with answering some of these. So we've had a comment from Jenny about gender analysis and the fact that women with disabilities in Northeast India were not aware of discrimination. I think that Nasreen commented on this in her presentation, in the lack of awareness of rights and discrimination amongst women that the I2I project also found. Nasreen, would you like to comment?
Nasreen appa?
যে কোশ্চেনটা একটু বুঝতে পারিনি। আনমিউট করছেন? তাসনিম আপা কোশ্চেনটা একটু বলেন। জি।
প্রথম প্রশ্নটা আমি আসলে দেখতে পাচ্ছি না। I can't see the question you asked actually. She needs to be explained.
Okay. It was a comment about women, another organization finding that women in Northeast India were not aware of the discrimination they faced. And I thought that was a similar observation to your findings, Nasreen, that women didn't know their rights, were not aware of their right to challenge their experiences.
নাসরিন আপা যেটা বলছে যে আরেকটা ওই যে অর্গানাইজেশন ওরা যেটা ওদের ইয়েতে করেছে যে নর্থ ইস্ট ইন্ডিয়াতে যেখানে মহিলারা জানতে পারতো না যে ওদেরকে ডিসক্রিমিনেট করা হচ্ছে। তো আপনার একটা প্রেজেন্টেশনে আপনি বলেছেন যে যেহেতু অনেকে আমাদের এই যে আইন অথবা কি কি ওদের অধিকার আছে সে সম্পর্কে ওদের পুরো ধারণাটা না থাকার কারণেই ওরা এই জিনিসগুলো ভালোভাবে বলতে পারতো না অথবা আদায় করে নিতে পারতো না। এই বক্তব্য অথবা এই প্রশ্ন এই যে ওরা জানতে পারে না সেটার আর কিছু আপনি অ্যাড করতে চান কিনা, আর কিছু যোগ করতে চান কিনা, কিছু বলতে চান কিনা?
ওকে তাসনিম আপা, ইয়েস, যেটা হচ্ছে যে আমাদের এটা কিন্তু খুবই মানে রিয়েলিটি যে গ্রাসরুট লেভেলে আমরা হচ্ছে অনেক প্রতিবন্ধী নারীরা আছে, প্রতিবন্ধী মানুষ, প্রতিবন্ধী নারী, তারা আসলে জানে না যে তাদের জন্য কি কি ফ্যাসিলিটিস আছে সরকারি পর্যায়ে, বেসরকারি পর্যায়ে, কি আইনের মধ্যে কি আছে, অথবা তাদের বিভিন্ন জায়গাতে কি ধরনের ফ্যাসিলিটিস আছে তারা মনে করে তারা জানে না। আসলে জানানোটা প্রয়োজন, সেই কারণে হচ্ছে খুবই প্রচার প্রয়োজন। এই তাদের অধিকারগুলো কি রয়েছে এগুলো সম্পর্কে তাদেরকে জানাতে হবে, এটা অনেক বড় একটি বিষয়। এবং পাশাপাশি হচ্ছে যারা এই ফ্যাসিলিটিস গুলো প্রোভাইড করবে সেই প্রোভাইডারদেরকেও জানতে হবে। লাইক হচ্ছে ডিসি অফিসে তাসনিম আপা হচ্ছে প্রতিবন্ধী অধিকার সুরক্ষা আইনের কমিটি আছে, কিন্তু ওই যে কমিটি আছে ডিসি নেতৃত্বে হচ্ছে ওই কমিটিটা জেলা পর্যায়ে হয়, কিন্তু ডিসি আসলে ভালো করে জানেই না যে কমিটিটা কেন, কিসের জন্য, যার জন্য উনি মিটিংই অর্গানাইজ করেন না। হ্যাঁ, তো এই বিষয়গুলো নীতি নির্ধারণী পর্যায়ে লোকজন জানে না আসলে। জি, ধন্যবাদ।
Thank you.
So she just added that absolutely correct that these people at the grassroots level, the disabled women or anybody with any disability, they're not aware of the facilities that are available for them or to them. So the government or the private sectors need to raise more awareness and do more publicity on this, you know. And additionally, those who are providing, should be providing these facilities or should be raising these awareness. For example, she mentioned the district offices, you know, the officers, they are not aware these of the disability laws or the acts that are available or what actually entails in these laws and acts. As a result, there are also committees that have been formed, you know, to take the initiative and to take these laws or the rights forward and try to implement or voice them. However, because these district offices are not aware or they have not educated themselves with these disability laws or rights, they do not organize for any meetings with these committees as well. And also no awareness is raised. So as a result, everything goes back to people, the disabled people, not knowing or not being aware of what facilities or what they can actually avail from the real or the practical field. So that's really important. That's what she says.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nasreen. We also have questions on the gender-based violence and experience of peer-to-peer research in relation to that. Ariana, can I ask you to take those questions?
Sure, thank you, Maureen. I was just going to add to the previous point very quickly, just to say that actually it's important to understand that sometimes, or that often what we see is not only a lack of awareness but of rights, but also just an acceptance of the status quo. So it's not perceived as discrimination because women are not seeing that as something that is different to what they were raised to see. So that was one point that I wanted to ask. In terms of the question on the research on violence against women with disabilities and income generation, it's an important point to make, and there is significant literature already on women with and without disability that suffer backlash from the fact they're engaged in economic empowerment interventions. There is less research specifically on that impact for women with disabilities. That is a gap. I mean, I'm happy to share afterwards, Vanessa, I'm happy to share what we have, and the reports, the full report on the gender analysis will have much more detail on that, but is indeed a gap that we found is in many of the research areas, we had to actually base for our initial research on the information available for women without disabilities, and then analyze and assess how those impacts and how those barriers would be exacerbated for women with disabilities based on the primary data collection. So that's definitely something to explore further.
Thank you very much. Vanessa also made the point about peer-to-peer research in the subject, and I can see I'm sure we can all see the value of that approach in addressing the subject of violence. We have one unanswered question on work for people with low education. I'll maybe just take liberties and answer that myself. In my experience, looking at job matching, so that you've got a match for the person and skills required in the job, is part of the answer. And the other is job carving. So sometimes job descriptions and person specifications ask for qualifications that are not really necessary, and jobs with some adjustment can be done by people with a lower level of education. So with the right support and flexibility, it's possible to get people with low education also into jobs and match successfully. With that, I'm going to have to say we'll have to close the questions. If you want any further discussion, please don't hesitate to contact the I2I project and its participants. They'll be very happy to help you. So in our discussions today, we've looked at the barriers that women with disabilities face. We've heard about some successful interventions, both in terms of the private sector organizations and how to remove some of those barriers, and the work that's currently being done by I2I on changing family and community approaches to women with disabilities, challenging the established norms and ways of seeing work and work opportunities. I'd like to thank you all very much for engaging so well in the participative session, and please feel free to continue to do that. As I said in the beginning, we will have the full proceedings online on the EDF website, and you'll be able to follow the discussion and continue it. So thank you to all of our panelists for your presentations. Thank you to the interpreters, both languages, Bangla and International Sign. We couldn't have done this without you, and of course the captioning as well. So thank you very much to all for organizing this important session. There's more work to be done, but it's good to have some positive strategies to take away. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Nah.